Do you feel like it gives you an advantage when looking for talent, having that option for those high performers to give them the remote option?
Yeah, undeniably. I actually tried in the last few years or a few years ago to bring more in house. I thought that was something that would be beneficial. And it was largely a failed experiment, to be honest with you. And it's precisely because of that. If you want the best person for a specific role, by forcing them to be in a geographic location, you're limiting your talent pool quite significantly. So it definitely, in my experience, has been better having a broader search.
When you're saying there was some lessons learned there or a failed experiment, can you tell us a little bit more about that? I think that's super relevant for our audience.
We have an office in Atlanta that we opened a few years ago with the idea of making that kind of a corporate headquarters. And we went out and started hiring for specifically that office. And so often we ran into problems where employees were, or potential employees were looking for remote options and actually did not want to be in an office and would just exclude you from a search if you were going to force in office. Or we would find that maybe we were looking for a specific niche role that not a lot of people in the Atlanta area we were really excited about, but then we would broaden the search and find somebody that was perfect. They just happened to live in a different zip code or a different part of the country. And so we ultimately started making exceptions to our regional rule. And then once you start making exceptions, then it's pretty hard to go to new people and say, we're not going to make an exception for you. And so it just really didn't really work.
Have you any lessons learned then how to manage a remote workforce? And is it different than managing people in person?
It's absolutely different. And getting the right cultural fit is harder remote because you don't have as many touch points when you're pure remote. And I think that we've had a lot of trial and error trying to get that right. Having quarterly in person meetings, I think, is extremely important. And it's something that in most of our remote departments, we do have that. So I think getting people together on some type of regular cadence for the most important teams, like our sales teams, I believe we do it quarterly. The bigger teams, we generally do quarterly. And then some other functions we may do once a year or twice a year, just depending on the type of role. But I do think some in-person interaction is extremely important. And I think that having a strong corporate set of corporate value structure is extremely important, and making sure that when you are talking with employees and when you're giving reviews to employees, that it's all framed in the context of your corporate values and your corporate culture. And the thing that people miss within that oftentimes is, if you really have values as a company, you have to be willing to hire and terminate based off of those values. And there have to be, like, even if you have employees that may be high performers by and large, but are not consistent with your corporate values or your culture, you have to be willing to move on from them. And I think that's a lesson that we've learned the hard way in certain cases, but I've gotten much better with. And I think that really having a strong set of values that you actually embody, that the leadership of your company embodies, and that you are constantly having conversations around, is extremely important, is even more important in a remote first environment.
Yeah, and I feel like we've talked to a lot of companies that say corporate culture is important, and but then a lot of them struggle to define what that corporate culture looks like and how they identify that in candidates and how they hire for that. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and how do you create an effective corporate culture that doesn't just say communication is important?
Yeah. I think it's multifaceted and multi-layered. And one piece of advice I would give to anyone that is watching this or thinking about it is reading the book Traction, which is like a operating system for businesses that talks a lot about this particular subject, and was really an inspiration when I went through this process a couple of years ago. I think that I am advantaged in that I own the business and I'm very operationally involved in the business, and the culture feeds down from me. And I think that being one person that is obviously very passionate about the business, that's an advantage that we have, and that I am able to set a very defined cultural environment that I live and breathe every single day. And I think that by showing that and then ultimately putting that on paper, which I did after reading the book Traction, and really put down a list of a mission statement and a set of values that are extremely important to me personally and to the success of our business. And then so articulating that, like living it, articulating it, and then rewarding people based off of how they are able to implement that themselves. And so it's really that three-pronged approach. Is you have to be able to model it, you have to be able to articulate what your expectations are, and then you have to incentivize against that. And where people oftentimes miss is they don't get at least one of those right, and then the whole thing breaks down if you don't have that whole ecosystem.